Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Osterberger with BIC Magazine. Today we are talking to Dr. Paul Schubert, CEO of Strategic Biofuels, a green energy supplier in Columbia, Louisiana, about 30 miles south of Monroe. Paul is also a PhD chemist with 35 years of experience in the petrochemical and renewable fuels industry. Dr. Schubert, we welcome you and appreciate you giving BIC Magazine a little bit of your time today.
Oh, thank you. Very glad to be here.
So, Dr. Paul, North Louisiana could be on track to become a multi-billion-dollar hub for renewable diesel refineries, and thanks for, in large part, to Strategic Biofuels, more than $1.5 billion investment in a new facility, which is dubbed the Louisiana Green Fuels. It's the first of a series of deeply negative carbon footprint plants Strategic Biofuels is developing, and it's my understanding that Strategic Biofuels could end up being the first renewable diesel producer in the world to capture and sequester CO2. Did I sort of get that right?
Yeah, we think so. So a combination of making the renewable fuels, but with the carbon capture and the sequestration, it makes it deeply, deeply negative.
Yeah, I can't wait to get more into that. So, Paul, let's do that. Let's get deep into this. And I find it interesting and quite different from maybe some of the other biofuels technologies that we've talked about. I want to get into this stratigraphic test well, Dr. Schubert. When you look at this project, can you talk a little bit more about the goals of that test well program and why is completing it so essential to the success?
Yeah, so I've worked on renewable fuel programs in the past, and generally what I found was the returns were pretty marginal at best. And so you really had to want to do something green to make the economics work. And so in sorting out, okay, well, how do you make something that has great returns? It really came down to if you could sequester the carbon that's produced, it just changed the whole picture. And really the only way that we were going to be able to establish that indeed you could do the carbon sequestration, other than kind of paper studies, was to actually go and say, well, we're going to raise the funds and drill the test well. So there's a sequestration test well that's required for this EPA Class 6 well, which are the sequestration test wells. And so the goal of that is, first of all, to confirm that you have all the geologic zones that are required. You need an upper containment zone, so a very dense, impermeable layer that doesn't let the CO2 come back up through it. And then you need a lower one as well, at least if you're going to try and get the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard credits. And then in between those two, you need a injection zone that will take the CO2, accept it, and that has enough capacity for you to take the CO2 that you produce over the productive life of the plant. And so the first thing is go take a lot of core samples and validate all the geologies there. And then second, to do a set of injections, and you use water as a substitute for the CO2 because you have to have the permit to do the CO2 that's dependent on the test well. So you do the injection, you validate that you can do it, and in doing that, you can measure that reservoir capacity.
Yeah, that's interesting, Doctor. So tell our audience a little bit more about the strategy behind the CO2 sequestration in comparison to maybe other or maybe larger plants.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because if you look at the economics of like what we're trying to do, and our volumes of product are like 33 to 34 million gallons per year of renewable diesel fuel. Okay, but it is extremely carbon negative. So we've been reviewed. We've had the data analyzed by Life Cycle Associates out in California, and they've scored it at minus 238 for a carbon intensity, which is just extremely carbon negative. It's on the order of the negativity of renewable natural gas. So if you do that, the revenues that we have are about the same as what you would have from a conventional renewable fuels plant that would be 10 times larger. And that's really dependent on a few things. First, like most of the renewable diesel that's out there would be produced really primarily from soybean oil. They earn D4 RINs, and we will earn D3 and D7 RINs. So right now there's just not a big market for aren't a whole lot of D7 RINs out there. So they're priced at the D3. So the difference currently that you get from that is worth about $4 per gallon that you produce. Okay, and then with the low carbon fuel standard credits and the difference in carbon footprint, that's another about $4 per gallon if they have sequestration, if they were added to like a regular renewable diesel plant, and about $6 per gallon if they don't. So when you look at that, there's an increase of margin of about $10 per gallon, and typically the margin for a renewable fuel plant, a renewable diesel plant using like animal fats or soybean oil is around $1 per gallon, and their feedstock runs about $4 per gallon. There's a lot of competition now out there for soybean oil, and it's also obviously used as a food. So that's been driving the cost of their feedstock up quite a bit over the last year, especially. And we've looked at it, and honestly, as little as a further 20 to 25% increase in their feedstock supply cost could eliminate those margins entirely. And the reality is, they're on a per gallon basis, their feedstock cost alone is higher than our operating cost. So you see we've got this like $10 per gallon at least difference in the revenues. So that's huge.
Oh, that is significant. Yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down, and really interesting. Never heard it explained to me quite like that. So Paul, without getting too deep into the weeds, how does the technology work for converting forestry waste, into clean burning renewable transportation fuels?
Sure. So the basic technology set's actually something that was developed back in the 1920s in Germany, because the whole world was shifting from a coal economy to a oil economy, and Germany didn't have oil; they just had coal. And then since then, actually since about the 1950s in South Africa, they have been doing the same thing, taking coal because they don't have any significant oil, and making their transportation fuels and lubricants from it. And of course, coal is a much worse feedstock than the southern yellow pine. That's basically the feedstock we'd be using. And the first step of the process is gasification. So coal gasification has actually been going on for nearly 200 years. But it can use, you can use almost any source of carbon for that. In our case, it's the wood waste. And we'll take that wood and we kind of disassociate it and make carbon monoxide and hydrogen. That's called synthesis gas, or usually syngas. And then we'll use that process developed in Germany called the Fischer-Tropsch process. That's 100 years old. And that converts that syngas to a synthetic wax, a paraffin, and a synthetic oil. Okay, and then you take those two, the wax and the oil, and you convert them to finished fuel using standard refinery processes. Now, one of the real advantages of that is, just like synthetic motor oil is superior to standard motor oil, the synthetic diesel that we would produce, or we could alternately produce the sustainable aviation fuel, but it is a superior product. So when you look at the diesel, the diesel that we would make is essentially sulfur-free. It's non-toxic. It's biodegradable. So just like gasoline has an octane rating, okay, and people are familiar with that, diesel has a cetane rating. So transportation diesel has a cetane in there around 50. This is going to be about 75. So it is just much, much superior. And if you fed this directly into a diesel engine at 100%, and it can be used at 100%, so it's not biodiesel. It is truly a chemically identical to fossil diesel, just much cleaner. If you fed it in at 100%, it would decrease the emissions out of that engine by 80% or more. So super clean, super high performing, biodegradable, just a great product.
Yeah, real neat, Dr. Paul. So how much, let's talk about volume. How much biofuel can or do you expect Louisiana Green Fuels to produce per year? If you have a different, measurement, have at it.
Sure. So we expect the plant to produce about 33 to 34 million gallons per year. And this would be the first plant. And that split is about 83% of that will be renewable diesel. And then there's about 17% that is renewable naphtha. And that naphtha is a blend component basically into the gasoline pool. And we actually have an offtake agreement for all of the fuel that we produce, and actually all of the credits that we'll produce, with one of the two largest truck stop operators in the country. And they'll actually pick up the fuel from Columbia, the Port of Columbia, and transport it to California in their rail car fleet.
Oh, wow. So by rail. Yeah.
By rail. Yeah, it'll all be by rail.
Huh, interesting. So Paul, what is the strategy behind choosing the Louisiana location, up there in North Louisiana?
So really kind of three things. First, we needed the forestry waste. So unlike, some of the other feedstocks, there isn't competition for it substantially. And they've been doing managed sustainable forestry in northern Louisiana for over 100 years. And it's interesting, most people in Louisiana don't realize that forestry is the #1 agricultural product. And about 50% of the land area in Louisiana is covered with forest, and I think it's like 80% of it is privately held. And so it's really thinnings from this, from that is the main feedstock. And in the region, they'll plant 500 to 700 seedlings per acre. And the goal is to grow timber and timber to produce lumber. And in order to have lumber, you have to get that down to about 100 plus or minus 20 trees. And so and you have to thin it on purpose, because otherwise the trees compete with each other and they never get to the diameter that's necessary for lumber. So there's typically two thinnings, one at like 12 to 15 years and another one about 7 years later. And they'll pull out that to get down to lumber size. So and there used to be two pulp mills, one by both Georgia Pacific, one just over the northern state line in Crossett, Arkansas, that shut down about I think it's 2 years ago. And then one just on the southern end of our supply radius in Port Hudson, Louisiana. They were using about 4 million tons a year combined of this type of material. We'll use 1 million tons. And actually, it was already a depressed market for those thinnings before the shutdown of the mills. And so we can't even replace that. So that's the first thing. You got to have the waste, you got to have the forestry waste, and there's lots of it. Second thing is that you have to have the right geology. So we talked about that a little bit, and you got to have this injection zone. You got to have the confinement zones. You need it thousands of feet below the drinking water aquifer. And that's present pretty much across northern Louisiana and certainly in areas in southern Louisiana. One of the things that made Caldwell Parish a target for us was that actually there's never been any significant oil or gas there. And it has these zones, but one of the main things people are concerned about for potential leakage of the CO2, if you put it in there, is old oil and gas wells that weren't properly sealed and that penetrate that confining zone. Well, unfortunately for Caldwell Parish, they never had any oil or gas. At least up until now. It was unfortunate, but that's actually one of the things we're looking for, because there just are no deep old wells that penetrated that confining zone. So it makes it nearly ideal for sequestration. And then the third thing is something that really makes Louisiana unique. And back in 2009, the Louisiana State Legislature was quite visionary in their approach to sequestration. So not very many states have actually even determined who has the right to sequester the CO2. Is it the mineral rights owner or is it the surface owner? And so if you think about what a mineral rights owner is, a mineral rights owner is someone who has the right to extract these valuable minerals or oil or gas from the soil, but they don't own the soil. And the surface owner in kind of breaking off the mineral rights retains the rest of that right. And so the state legislature passed the first law that said that the surface owner has the right to sequester the CO2. Okay, and that's a big deal. And only a handful of states have even determined that. The second thing that Louisiana did that was quite unique was in looking forward and saying, look, sequestration is going to be a significant player in emissions reduction, carbon footprint reduction, and in solving the problem of energy emissions for energy production, was to say that, look, it is in the public interest to sequester CO2. And because it's in the public interest, then there should be, and they passed a law that says that there is, an eminent domain right to acquire the rights to store the CO2, which are known as pore rights, because they go into the pore space within that saline aquifer. And what that is means from a project point of view is that no one can ultimately block the project. So just imagine that within the area that the CO2 is going to spread out over 30 years, say somebody owned a square foot of property, and they own therefore the pore rights for that square foot deep below. If they said, no, we don't want to sell you the pore rights, we don't want to give you the pore rights at all, we're gonna hold out, they potentially could block the project, because then you would be trespassing. Okay, and so that would put an end to it. And so that's why the state passed that. Now we still have to go out and make a good faith attempt to acquire all the pore rights in the radius that we would be looking at. And generally people think that after 30 years of what we'd be doing, it would be like 1.5 mile to 2 mile radius around the plant site. And we're actually injecting like right at the actual plant site, not running a pipeline somewhere else to do the injection. But that ability to acquire all the pore rights ultimately, and actually to acquire them over time, so you don't even have to have all of them up front, but over time you can acquire them, is a huge deal. And then the third thing is these the wells, the sequestration, it requires monitoring over the long period of time. The US regulation under the EPA is 50 years of monitoring. Under the California regulations for the low carbon fuel standard out there, it's 100 years of monitoring. And so what the legislature did was they said, okay, we understand that. And so after you've put the last molecule of CO2 in the ground, and you've gone through a pretty extensive program and lengthy and period of time where you can demonstrate that the wells are sealed down, that there's no leakage, there hasn't been any leakage, then the state actually will take over the monitoring and remediation of those wells. Okay, so in terms of a risk perspective for the long term, that's a big deal.
Yeah, Paul, that's incredible. Yeah, so 3 essential elements for the project: abundant forestry waste, the correct geology, and that legislative and regulatory framework being favorable. So that's interesting. So Paul, who are some of your primary partners? The engineering, procurement, and construction of the assets needed to perform this project.
Sure. So we've had a really good team, and the plan is they stay with us through the whole project. So it really started with Geostock Sandia. Mm-hmm. They're a geology company basically, and they look, and kind of their bread and butter is toxic waste disposal wells. Now these aren't, CO2 isn't a toxic waste, but they understand the geology. They actually have been working with the Department of Energy on these sequestration wells for nearly 20 years. And so they were actually helped us identify locations in northern Louisiana that would be promising for this. Okay, and they've continued to support us. So They've been involved in the oversight of the sequestration test well, helping establish what the protocols are, and actually they will go and be part of securing the Class 6 well permit from the EPA, or actually the state of Louisiana is expecting to get primacy to issue those permits sometime, hopefully early this year. So they've been intimately involved in that, and will follow through the whole program. Kind of the next thing that you need is ideally the EPC contractor, as you said, and ultimately we've got Koch Project Solutions, a part of Koch Industries, that will be the EPC contractor, and they will provide a lump sum turnkey price and provide the wrap over the facility that says, okay, this is going to work and it's going to meet all the targets. And right now they're working as in an advisory and project management role for us. Okay, and in fact they were with me as we worked through selecting the sites, so they provide a lot of guidance there. And at financial close, they'll actually shift into that EPC role instead of being just project management. In terms of the engineering role, I know we said that Koch was going to be EPC, but we started out with the project with Hatch, which is the largest engineering company in Canada, really filling the role of engineering. And they have a lot of people with experience, in fact, deep experience, both with gasification, with the Fischer-Tropsch process, and then the upgrading. And so we started them out in the engineering role, and they're going to continue all the way through to the end. So really as subcontractors, then for the E role and probably the procurement under Koch. And in fact, it's interesting that Hatch is really kind of taken the approach that we do. We think it's very important to be involved in the community and be part of it. And just actually this past week, Hatch made a commitment to the Caldwell Parish community where the plant will be, and they're sponsoring a STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math in the Caldwell Parish schools. And that's, really highly unusual, but highly desirable. The schools wanted to be able to do that, but they just haven't had the resources. Caldwell Parish is actually the 10th poorest parish in Louisiana. The average household income's only like $32,000 per year.
Wow.
And they're the 6th lowest population. So, for Hatch to say we're going to make a commitment, actually they've made a 3-year commitment to support that, is just huge in this community. And it obviously gathers a lot of support for the project and for the work that we're doing.
Yeah, that's exciting for the community, Paul, and important for obviously economic development and jobs in the area. So, Paul, how many kind of new employees are you expecting to, hire maybe by the time the facility is up and running? I know some of that is, decisions that happen throughout this process, but give me some estimate of what do you think this facility looks like as far as manpower once it's running?
Sure. So the estimates right now are about 146 full-time employees at the plant, and that covers a whole range of skills, from highly technical to much less so. In addition, we have actually mapped out what the employment's going to do during construction. So right now we're estimating about 635 workers over a 30-month construction period, roughly. And our expectation is actually that will peak at about 1,500 workers at the site. So, for a parish that's as small as Caldwell Parish, this is obviously a big deal. And in fact, it really can be viewed as a regional project, not just a Caldwell Parish project. It'll affect the parishes around us.
Yeah, that's significant. Also, they'll man camp some of the area. Will they be commuting to Monroe, or how do you see that happen?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The expectation from Koch is that they will engage a firm that is used to doing construction, used to doing it in areas even more remote than kind of where we are. Right. And it's funny about the man camp. So kind of the story is that if you build a man camp, the workers will stay in it as long as it takes to find somewhere else. Because there's all sorts of rules on the man camps and stuff, and it's like they don't want to do that, and a lot of them will bring their RVs and such. So really, it's not build a man camp.
Yeah.
But they will bring the core workers with them. And the particular one we've been looking at, they maintain a staff of about 5,000 to 10,000 workers at any one time as direct hires, and they are used to bringing them into a remote location. So that's it. But one of the other things that Coke is committed to, and the people we look at are committed to, is training up people in the community. So there's actually going to be a series of trainings that will start once we hit financial close, to make sure that people who are able to do the skills and interested and can learn them can have a job during construction. And then we're actually working with the state and with some of the educational groups in the area to provide training for the long-term positions, the permanent positions at the plant.
Yeah, neat. So, Doctor, let me get into project timeline. You touched this a little bit, but update us on the project timeline, including engineering, operational use, and expectation of when you'll reach full capacity, if you could.
Sure. So we've kicked off our FEL3 study. It's going to take about a year. That's going to take us then to financial close. So we're looking at financial close in early 2023. And it's interesting, actually, the Port of Columbia, which is where we're going to be, they've gone out and gotten recently a $15 million Louisiana Port Improvement Grant. And they're actually going to begin to upgrade the port site this summer. So upgrading the road that goes into the port so it can do heavy construction. There's going to be a rail overpass so that the commercial traffic in and out don't ever have to cross a railroad at grade. There's a Union Pacific main line beside the plant. And then also actually bring the Union Pacific line in with a rail spur. But that construction of the road, that's the first thing that they're planning for that to begin in the June, July timeframe. As I said, it's kind of a 30-month roughly construction schedule. We expect to be operational in 2025 and then reach full capacity sometime in 2026.
Exciting, yeah. So, Paul, I'll kind of wrap up with this question. Give us the what else, right? I know you love that. We're talking about something I'm already asking about the future, but what else is Strategic Biofuels going to be doing here? Is it expanding there in North Louisiana down the road? Give us some idea of what we can expect in the future.
Sure. Well, first and foremost is get the first one done. So we got to focus, you got to deliver and make sure that. So that's priority number one. But we have looked a little bit beyond that. So we've actually acquired enough land around the port that we can build a second plant there on the land we have control with. And in fact, we've had Hatch already give us a preliminary layout of that second plant. So we know that it fits within the footprint. We know that there's more than enough wood available, wood waste to supply it and all of that. In fact, we're expecting that, after the first one's up and running and has kind of proven things out, that we'll move right into a second plant at the site. And then we believe that we can actually support a third plant within Caldwell Parish. And beyond that, we've looked at, we have our geologists looking at some sites potentially in southern Louisiana. But those three things that I told you that we needed and that brought us to Louisiana, right now the immediate plan is to pretty much stay in Louisiana, although we could certainly expand beyond that. But it's like deliver number one, and then we'll build from there.
Well, Dr. Schubert, I had a blast talking to you. Thank you so much. I know you've got some limited time, and some folks were real interested in this project and wanted to give you some time to really explain it thoroughly. So we thank you for doing so.
Oh, thank you very much.
And look, if media is invited to the ribbon cutting, please, I'd love to see it in operational use as well. If I can ever take a tour, that'd be real neat.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Schubert, thank you. For anyone interested in following the progress of this project, you can visit strategicbiofuels.com. As always, we are most grateful for our audience. Please like and share this recording with colleagues. And for more industry news, videos, webinars, and podcasts, visit bicmagazine.com. Hey, remember, everybody, it's what we do together that counts.